I can smell the cheap jasmine perfume she wears when she's been with him. It clings to the humidity of our apartment like a layer of grease. My fingers are numb, the leather handle of the briefcase digging a permanent groove into my palm. Inside this bag is enough money to buy every building on this block, yet I feel like a man standing on a trap door. The air is too thick. My heart is a frantic bird hitting the walls of my chest. I have the news. I have the power. But looking at her silhouette against the window, I realize I've already lost everything that didn't have a price tag. Arthur stood in the doorway of the fourth-floor walk-up, the sound of the city's sirens bleeding through the thin walls. He didn't drop his keys into the ceramic bowl. He held them. The weight of the briefcase in his right hand felt wrong, an alien object in a room filled with IKEA furniture and fading wallpaper. The radiator hissed, a rhythmic, metallic wheeze that matched his breathing. He looked at the scuff marks on his sensible brown shoes. I am a billionaire, and I am still afraid of my own living room. He stepped over a pile of mail. The floorboard groaned under the new weight of his reality. Selena sat at the small circular table, her back to him. The light from a single overhead bulb caught the sharp line of her shoulders. She was already dressed for the evening, a silk slip dress that cost more than Arthur's monthly grocery budget. On the table sat a bottle of wine he didn't recognize and a thick stack of stapled papers. The air smelled of burnt toast and expensive French cigarettes. She didn't turn around. She just tapped a manicured fingernail against the wood, a slow, predatory beat. Arthur moved to the table, his movements mechanical. He set the heavy leather case down. The thud it made was deep, echoing the density of the legal documents inside. The deeds to the Sterling shipping empire, the liquid asset transfers, the death certificate of a grandfather who hadn't spoken to him in 20 years. He tried to swallow, but his throat was a desert. He wanted to tell her about the $2.1 billion. He wanted to see her face soften, to see the woman he married 5 years ago reappear from behind the mask of icy indifference. "You're late, Arthur," Selena said, her voice a low blade. She finally turned, her eyes scanning him with a familiar, practiced disgust. She didn't notice the briefcase, or, if she did, she assumed it was filled with ungraded history essays. But I suppose that's the theme of our lives, isn't it? Stagnation, tardiness, the slow rot of the middle class. She pushed the papers toward him. The word divorce was printed in bold, cold letters at the top. It feels like a physical punch to the solar plexus. Arthur opened his mouth to speak, but she held up a hand. Don't. No speeches about working through it. No more promises of a summer vacation we can't afford. She stood up, her silk dress shimmering. Julian is downstairs. He's taking me to the opening of the new tower in Midtown, the life I was actually meant for. She laughed, a sharp, jagged sound that cut through the hiss of the radiator. You're a good man, Arthur, but you're a small man, and I am done being diminished by your lack of ambition. She grabbed a pen from the table, a cheap plastic ballpoint that leaked. With a flourish that bordered on performance art, she flipped to the final page and scribbled her name. The ink was thick and messy. She didn't read the clauses. She didn't look at the fine print Arthur's grandfather's lawyers had insisted on for protection of the bloodline. She just wanted out. I watched the ink dry, realizing she just signed away a fortune for a ride in a stranger's car. Arthur reached for the latch of his briefcase. The brass clicked. He could show her now. He could flip the lid and reveal the documents that would make Julian look like a street-side busker. He saw her reflection in the darkened window. She was checking her makeup, completely detached from him. He paused. If he told her now, she would tear up those papers. She would play the doting wife again. She would cling to him like a parasite. The realization hit him with the force of a tidal wave. She didn't love Arthur. She didn't even know him. Keep the apartment, she said, tossing the pen onto the papers. Keep the books, keep your history. I'm taking the jewelry Julian bought me and leaving the rest. She grabbed her clutch and headed for the door, not casting a single glance back at the man she had lived with for half a decade. The door slammed, the vibration rattling the cheap frame prints on the wall. The silence that followed was louder than her laughter. It was the sound of a vacuum. Arthur sat down in the chair she had just vacated. He pulled the divorce papers toward him. He looked at her signature, messy, arrogant, and final. He then opened his briefcase and pulled out the gold-embossed folder of the Sterling estate. He laid the two documents side by side. One represented his past, a marriage built on a foundation of sand. The other represented a future of cold, hard steel and infinite reach. He picked up the phone. His fingers didn't tremble anymore. "This is Arthur Sterling," he said into the receiver, his voice dropping an octave, losing the softness of the schoolteacher. "The transition of power is complete. Notify the board and call my legal team. I have a specific clause in a divorce settlement I need reinforced." He looked at the empty doorway. The jasmine smell was fading, replaced by the scent of old paper and new leather. "I am the most powerful man in the city, and I have never felt more like a ghost." The silence of the apartment is a physical weight, heavier than the billions sitting in the briefcase. I expected to feel a surge of triumph, a rush of, "I'll show her," but there's only this cold, hollow ringing in my ears. My life changed in the span of a pen stroke, yet the air still smells like her burnt toast. I look at my hands, the hands of a teacher, stained with whiteboard marker and ink, and wonder if they can actually hold the reins of an empire. I feel like a fraud standing in the wreckage of my own heart. The world thinks I've won the lottery, but right now I'm just a man sitting in the dark, clutching a ghost. Arthur dialed the number on the black embossed card. It was 9 p.m. The phone was answered on the first ring. "Mr. Sterling?" The voice was gravelly, professional, and devoid of warmth. It was Elias Thorne, the family's lead counsel for 3 decades. Arthur looked at the divorce papers, the ink of Selena's signature looking like a jagged scar. "It's done," Arthur said. He didn't recognize his own voice. It lacked the stutter, the hesitation he used with the school board. "She signed. She's gone." "Excellent," Thorne replied. The sound of shuffling papers came through the line. The timing was fortuitous. By signing before the public disclosure of the probate, she has forfeited any claim to the appreciation of the Sterling assets. My team is already moving the filings through the midnight court. Arthur stood up and walked to the window. Below, the city lights twinkled like cold diamonds. "I am the hunter now, and I don't even know how to hold the weapon." Across town, Selena stepped out of Julian's silver Bentley. The air at the Midtown Tower was different, crisp, filtered, smelling of money and arrogance. Julian gripped her waist, his hand possessive. He was a man of sharp angles and expensive tailoring, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "You look radiant," he whispered, though he was looking at the paparazzi line, not her. Selena adjusted her silk dress, feeling a surge of adrenaline. She had traded a cramped walk-up for this. She didn't miss the smell of Arthur's old books for a second. The ballroom was a sea of black ties and champagne flutes. Selena moved through the crowd like she belonged there, her head held high. Julian leaned in close, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "There's a shift coming, Selena. A massive power vacuum in the shipping sector. If we play this right, we're not just looking at a tower. We're looking at a dynasty." She nodded, though she didn't understand the mechanics. She just knew Julian was the winner, and Arthur was the history lesson she had finally finished. Back in the apartment, Arthur sat on the floor, the briefcase light illuminating his face. He flipped to the section Thorne had highlighted. Clause 14b, Indemnification of Marital Liabilities. He read the words carefully. Because the divorce was filed under irreconcilable differences with immediate severance, any undisclosed debts or legal encumbrances tied to the spouse's future business ventures remained solely with that spouse. Selena hadn't just signed for freedom, she had signed a blank check for Julian's impending disasters. The trap is set, and I didn't even have to bait it. At the gala, Julian's phone buzzed. He stepped away from Selena to take the call in a marble alcove. His face transformed, the polished mask slipping to reveal a panicked, sweating man. "What do you mean the Sterling accounts are frozen?" he hissed into the receiver. "The old man is dead. The heir is a nobody. We move now or we lose the leverage." He slammed his fist against the marble. Selena watched from a distance, her brow furrowing. For a moment, the gold of the ballroom felt like painted tin. A black SUV pulled up to the curb of Arthur's apartment building. 2 men in charcoal suits stepped out, their movements synchronized. They didn't knock. They used a key Thorne had provided. Arthur didn't flinch when they entered. He stood up, picked up the briefcase, and left the divorce papers on the kitchen table next to a half-eaten apple. He walked past the men without a word. He left the keys in the door. He was done with this version of himself. I am shedding my skin, and it hurts more than I thought. The SUV moved through the city streets, a silent predator in the night. Arthur looked out the tinted window, watching the neighborhoods change from brick and graffiti to glass and steel. He saw the Midtown Tower where the gala was being held. He knew Selena was inside, laughing, drinking, and celebrating her escape. He felt a strange, cold pity for her. She thought she had reached the summit, but she was standing on a crumbling ledge. The car stopped at the underground garage of the Sterling corporate headquarters. Arthur was led to a private elevator that required a biometric scan. The doors opened to a sprawling office on the 80th floor. The desk was a solid slab of ancient mahogany. On it sat a single file, Julian Vane, Asset Liability Report. Arthur sat down, the leather chair sighing under his weight. He opened the file. Julian wasn't just a developer. He was a failing gambler using Selena as a bridge to a fortune he thought was up for grabs. Thorne, Arthur said into the desk intercom, initiate the audit on Vane's Midtown holdings and make sure the divorce decree is filed by sunrise. I want her legally severed before the first domino falls. He closed his eyes for a second, seeing Selena's laughing face in the dark. You wanted a bigger life, Selena. Now you have to pay for it. The morning light is a physical assault, cutting through the floor-to-ceiling glass of this penthouse office. I haven't slept. My eyes feel like they've been rubbed with sand, and my throat is tight with the metallic tang of too much espresso. This mahogany desk is a continent away from the scarred plywood where I used to grade essays. I keep waiting for a bell to ring, for a student to ask about the fall of Rome, but the only sound is the low hum of servers managing billions. I am no longer an observer of history. I am the one writing the casualty list. It's a terrifying kind of clarity. Arthur stood by the window of the Sterling Tower, watching the sunrise bleed over the East River. He wore a suit that cost more than his previous annual salary, the fabric light as a second skin. Beside him, Elias Thorne stood with a tablet, scrolling through a list of Julian Vane's primary creditors. The transition had been seamless. The world didn't know yet that the nobody teacher was now the most powerful man in shipping, but the bank accounts knew. The numbers were staggering, cold, and absolute. In a penthouse suite across town, Selena stirred in a bed that wasn't hers. The sheets were silk, but the air felt frigid. Julian was already up, pacing the balcony, his voice a frantic whisper into his phone. He looked different in the harsh light of morning, grayer, thinner, the bravado replaced by a twitch in his jaw. Selena sat up, a lingering headache throbbing behind her eyes. Julian? What's wrong? She asked, her voice cracking. I feel a cold dread settling in my stomach, like ice in a glass. A chain that now led directly to a prison cell. Thorne laid out a series of folders on the mahogany desk. Vane was clever but desperate, the lawyer explained. He moved $40 million through an offshore account in your wife's name, your ex-wife's name, 2 days ago. Because she signed the pre-existing debt and full liability clauses in your divorce settlement, she is now the primary target for the recovery audit. Arthur looked at the folders. They weren't just papers. They were the bars of a cage. Bring her up, Arthur said. The words felt heavy, like stones dropped into a deep well. Thorne raised an eyebrow but signaled the security team. Arthur turned his chair toward the window, looking out at the city he now partially owned. He heard the muffled ding of the private elevator. He heard the frantic, uneven click of her heels on the hardwood floor. The door opened, and the scent of that cheap jasmine perfume filled the room, clashing with the expensive leather and wood. Arthur, Selena gasped, lunging toward the desk. She stopped when she saw the sheer scale of the room, the coldness of the men standing in the shadows. Arthur, please, Julian. He lied to me. He set me up. These papers say I owe millions. You have to tell them it's a mistake. You have the money now, right? You can make this go away. She reached out to touch the desk, but Thorne stepped forward, clearing his throat. The distance between them was more than just physical. It was a chasm of different realities. Arthur spun his chair around slowly. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. It wasn't a mistake, Selena, he said, his voice a low, steady hum. You signed those papers because you were so eager to leave a small man that you didn't bother to see the person in front of you. He picked up the divorce decree she had signed the night before. You signed this with a laugh, remember? You called me dead weight. You were so busy looking for a kingdom that you walked right over the one I was trying to give you. Selena began to sob, a harsh, ugly sound. I didn't know, Arthur. How could I know? She sank to her knees on the plush carpet. I'll do anything. I'll come back. We can start over. We can use this money to… Arthur cut her off with a sharp raise of his hand. There is no we. You signed that away too. Section 8, paragraph 4. Total waiver of spousal support and asset entitlement. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. I see the greed still flickering in her eyes, even through the tears. Arthur stood up and signaled to Thorne. The lawsuit for fraud and asset recovery proceeds as scheduled, Arthur stated, his voice devoid of any tremor. The debts Julian incurred in her name are now hers to settle. We will offer no settlement. We will offer no mercy. He walked toward the elevator, leaving her on the floor. He didn't look back as the doors slid shut. The jasmine scent was gone, replaced by the sterile, cold air of the 80th floor. I am the king of this tower, and the view from the top is a graveyard. The air in this ballroom is a vacuum, sucking the life out of me one polite nod at a time. 6 months of this. 6 months of silk ties, hostile takeovers, and the crushing silence of a mansion built for a family that doesn't exist. My name is now spoken in whispers that sound like prayer or poison, depending on who's holding the glass. I wear the sterling name like a suit of armor, but it's starting to feel like a coffin. I see her face in every shadow, a ghost of a life I burned down to survive. My hands are clean, but my soul feels like it's covered in soot. Arthur stood before a three-way mirror in his dressing room, adjusting the lapels of a midnight blue tuxedo. The soft-spoken history teacher was gone, replaced by a man with hollow cheeks and eyes that had seen too many balance sheets. He looked at his reflection and didn't see a hero. He saw a titan. The room was silent except for the ticking of a clock that cost more than his old apartment. I look like a king, and I feel like a hollow shell. He picked up a pair of obsidian cufflinks, the cold stone biting into his skin. The gala was a sea of excess, a celebration of the Sterling Empire's latest acquisition. Arthur stepped out of the limousine, the flashbulbs of the paparazzi hitting him like a physical assault. He didn't blink. He didn't smile. He walked the red carpet with a measured, predatory grace. Beside him, Elias Thorne checked his watch, his face a mask of iron. The board is waiting, Arthur, Thorne whispered, and the sharks are circling. Keep your guard up. In the far corner of the ballroom, hidden behind a floral arrangement, Selena watched him. She was wearing a dress that had been rented from a second-hand shop, the hem frayed and the color faded. Her face was gaunt, the skin tight over her cheekbones. For 6 months, she had lived in a basement efficiency, hounded by Julian's creditors and the relentless legal team Arthur had unleashed. She wasn't here for love. She was here for survival. Her eyes tracked Arthur with a desperate, feverish intensity. Selena's phone buzzed in her cheap clutch. A text from a blocked number. You have 1 hour to get the signature, or the collection agency visits your mother's house. She felt a wave of nausea. Julian's debts had been sold to men who didn't use lawyers. They used crowbars. She had been backed into a corner by the very pre-existing debt clause she'd signed in her arrogance. I am a drowning woman, and the man who pushed me in is the only one with a boat. Arthur moved through the crowd, shaking hands with ambassadors and hedge fund managers. He spoke in short, punchy sentences, his mind 3 steps ahead of every conversation. He saw the way the women looked at him, the hunger, the ambition, and felt a wave of revulsion. He remembered Selena looking at him with that same hunger when she thought Julian was the prize. It was all a game of mirrors. He took a glass of champagne but didn't drink. He needed his head clear for the kill. Arthur turned to move toward the VIP balcony when a hand caught his sleeve. It was a light touch, but it sent a jolt of electricity through him. He looked down to see a thin, pale hand with chipped nail polish. A far cry from the manicured claws he remembered. He looked up, and his breath hitched. Selena stood there, her eyes swimming with tears that looked practiced yet terrifyingly real. Arthur, she whispered, her voice a ragged ghost of the laughter that used to haunt him. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "They're going to take everything. My mother's house, the car, everything. Julian is gone, Arthur. He left me with nothing but his sins." She stepped closer, the smell of her cheap perfume now a sickly sweet reminder of his old life. "I know I was wrong. I was blind. But you were always the good man. You were the one who taught me about mercy." I hear her words, and they taste like ash. Before Arthur could respond, Thorne appeared like a specter stepping between them. He didn't use force, he used the sheer weight of his presence. "Ms. Sterling, or rather Ms. Vane," Thorne said, his voice a cold rasp, "you are in violation of a standing restraining order regarding the Sterling corporate offices and its principal officers. This gala is a private event." He signaled to two security guards who had been hovering in the wings. Selena's face crumbled, the mask of beauty falling away to reveal pure terror. Arthur watched as the guards took her by the arms. She didn't scream. She just looked at him, her eyes wide and pleading. He had expected to feel a rush of victory, the final checkmate in a long-running game. But as the doors of the ballroom closed behind her, he felt only a profound, echoing emptiness. He looked at his hand where she had touched his sleeve. He felt the coldness of the building, the coldness of the money, and the coldness of the man he had become. "Thorne," Arthur said, his voice barely a whisper, "did we check the mother's house? Is it part of the seizure?" Thorne nodded. "Every asset is being liquidated to cover the Vane fraud, as per your instructions." Arthur turned back to the crowd. "I have won the war, and I am standing alone in the ruins of my heart. The champagne tastes like battery acid. Every time I close my eyes, I see her chipped fingernails digging into the silk of my sleeve. It's a phantom limb pain. The part of me that loved her is screaming, while the part of me that owns this city is silent and cold. I built this fortress to keep the world out, but all I've done is lock myself in with the memory of who I used to be. The music is too loud, the diamonds are too bright, and the air is running out. I am a billionaire, a titan, a ghost, and the ghost is starting to haunt the king." Selena was shoved through the service exit, the heavy steel door slamming behind her with a finality that felt like a gavel. The rain began to fall, a cold, needle-like drizzle that soaked through her thin dress in seconds. She stood in the trash-strewn alley, gasping for air. Her heart was a trapped animal. She looked at the towering glass spire of the Sterling building and felt a surge of pure, unfiltered hatred. It wasn't just the money, it was the way Arthur had looked at her, as if she were a footnote in a history book he had already finished. A man stepped out from behind a stack of industrial crates. He wasn't one of the security guards. He was lean, wearing a hood that shadowed his face, but Selena recognized the way he held his shoulders. "Julian," she breathed, her voice a mix of terror and hope. The man stepped into the yellow glow of a street lamp. It was Julian Vane, but the polish was gone. His face was bruised, and his expensive coat was stained. He didn't look like a developer. He looked like a fugitive. "He's destroying everything, Selena," Julian hissed, his eyes darting to the ends of the alley. "He didn't just take the empire. He's hunting me. He's buying up my debts and selling them to people who don't use courtrooms." He grabbed her shoulders, his grip bruising. "I knew about the inheritance. I knew before Arthur did. I worked for the old man. I saw the ledger." Selena froze. The world tilted on its axis. He knew. Every touch, every "I love you" was a calculated move on a chessboard I couldn't see. "You used me," Selena whispered, the rain washing the tears and mascara down her face. Julian didn't deny it. He didn't have the time. "We both used each other, Selena. You wanted the penthouse. I wanted the bridge to the Sterling accounts. But Arthur, he's not the man you think he is. He's been playing us both since the night you signed those papers." He shoved a small, encrypted USB drive into her hand. "This is the access key to the Sterling internal server. Get back inside. Find the Project Icarus folder. It's the only leverage we have left." Arthur retreated to his private library at the top of the tower, away from the gala's noise. He sat in a leather chair that smelled of tobacco and ancient dust. He opened a drawer and pulled out a photograph, the only one he had kept. It was of him and Selena on their wedding day, standing in front of a cramped courthouse. They looked happy. They looked poor. He took a lighter from the desk and held the flame to the corner of the picture. I watch the fire eat our smiles, and I wonder if I'm burning the only real thing I ever had. Selena didn't go home. She used the service key she had swiped from a distracted waiter during the gala. She moved through the darkened kitchens and the laundry levels, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew the layout. She had studied the blueprints when Julian was still investing in the building. She found the service elevator and punched in the code Julian had given her. The lift groaned, rising toward the executive floors. She was a virus entering the bloodstream of a giant. The 80th floor was a tomb of glass and blue standby lights. Selena crept toward the terminal in the reception area. Her fingers shook as she plugged in the USB drive. The screen flickered to life, the sterling logo glowing like a cold sun. She searched for Icarus. Files began to populate. Records of Julian's employment, internal memos, and a series of recorded phone calls. She clicked on the most recent one. The voice that came through the speakers wasn't Julian's. It was Arthur's. "Let him think he's winning, Thorne." Arthur's voice echoed in the empty lobby. "Let him take Selena. Let him move the funds. I want the paper trail to be so thick that even a blind judge can see the fraud." The recording continued, Arthur's voice devoid of the softness she once knew. "She'll sign the debt clause because she's greedy. And when she does, we own them both." Selena slumped against the desk, the cold blue light of the monitor making her look like a corpse. "He didn't just let me go. He steered me into the storm." The lights in the lobby hummed as they flickered to full brightness. Selena spun around, her breath hitching. Arthur was standing by the window, his tuxedo jacket gone, his white sleeves rolled up. He didn't look surprised to see her. He looked like a man who had been waiting for a late appointment. "You found it," he said softly. He didn't move toward her. He just stood there, silhouetted against the city he had conquered. "You didn't just inherit an empire, Arthur," Selena choked out, holding the USB drive like a weapon. "You inherited his soul. You're just like your grandfather." Arthur finally looked at her, and for the first time she saw a flash of something human. A deep, agonizing regret. "No, Selena," he said. "He was a businessman. I'm a man who was pushed too far. I am looking at the woman I loved, and all I see is the evidence of my own cruelty. The air in this office has turned to glass. If I breathe too hard, I feel like I'll shatter." I look at Selena, her face washed out by the cold blue glow of the monitors, and I don't see the woman who shared my bed for 5 years. I see a ghost trapped in a machine. My chest is tight, a familiar ache that no amount of money can numb. I set this trap with the precision of a watchmaker, but now that the gears are turning, I realize I'm the one caught in the rhythm. I've become the monster I was supposed to be protecting her from. Or maybe I'm just the man she deserved. Arthur didn't move from the window. The city behind him was a tapestry of light, but inside the 80th floor, the atmosphere was funereal. He watched Selena's reflection in the glass, her trembling hands, her wet hair, the way she gripped the USB drive as if it were a life raft. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint, rhythmic whir of the computer's cooling fans. "You were never supposed to come back here, Selena," he said, his voice a flat, low vibration. "The exit was meant to be final." Selena lunged toward him, her voice a jagged scream that tore through the quiet. "Final? You orchestrated this. You watched me walk into Julian's arms knowing he was a snake." She held up the drive, her knuckles white. "This recording proves you knew about the fraud before I even signed the divorce. You used me as bait to catch a mid-level thief. You sacrificed your wife for a corporate cleanup." She's screaming the truth, and it sounds like a death sentence. Arthur finally turned, his face a mask of weary iron. He didn't flinch at her rage. "I didn't sacrifice a wife, Selena. I watched a stranger walk out of my life with a man who had been robbing my family for a decade." He walked slowly toward the desk, his movements measured and heavy. "I gave you a choice. Every day for 5 years, I gave you a choice to be satisfied with a life built on something other than greed. You didn't just leave, you leaped." He pressed a key on the terminal, and a new window popped up. It was a scanned copy of the divorce settlement, specifically page 14. The pre-existing debt clause was highlighted in a violent neon yellow. "Julian didn't just use you to get to the sterling accounts," Arthur said. his voice dropping to a whisper. He used your signature to secure bridge loans for his failing developments. When you signed this, you didn't just divorce me. You married his debt. Selena slumped into the leather executive chair, the very seat of power she had once coveted. She looked at the numbers on the screen, the millions in liabilities, the interest rates, the personal guarantees. He said we were going to be a dynasty, she whispered, the fight draining out of her. He said you were the small one. She looked up at Arthur, her eyes vacant. Why didn't you stop me? If you loved me even a little, why didn't you stop me from signing it? The double doors of the office swished open. Elias Thorne stepped in, flanked by two men in dark overcoats. He didn't look at Selena, he looked at his watch. The authorities are downstairs, Arthur. The Vane Group's collapse is being announced on the morning news cycle. We need to finalize the transfer of the Midtown holdings before the freeze becomes permanent. He paused, his cold eyes finally landing on Selena. And the trespasser needs to be processed. Selena stood up, her face hardening again. She brandished the USB drive. I'm not a trespasser. I'm a whistleblower. I have the recordings, Thorne. I have proof of Arthur's Project Icarus. If I go down, I'm taking this entire tower with me. She looked at Arthur, a desperate, wild smile touching her lips. Call off the debt, clear my name, or I hit send to the SEC and the press. We both know the Sterling name can't survive a scandal this big. Thorne let out a dry, rattling laugh. Ms. Vane, do you really think we would allow a terminal with external access to be left unmonitored? He tapped a command on his tablet. The screen in front of Selena went black. The USB drive in her hand began to feel warm, then hot. A faint wisp of smoke curled from the port. Remote encryption wipe, Thorne said dismissively. The files you think you have don't exist anymore. In fact, they never did. They were honeypots designed to lure Julian out of hiding. Arthur walked to the edge of the desk and leaned against it, looking down at his ex-wife. The power dynamic was absolute. He held her debt, her future, and her freedom in his hands. He could end the lawsuit with a single word, or he could let the gears of the Sterling machine grind her into dust. He felt the weight of the gold pen in his pocket, the pen that had signed his grandfather's empire into his name. I have her exactly where I wanted her, and I've never felt more disgusted with myself. It's time to choose, Arthur, Thorne said, his voice a cold prompt. Mercy or justice? One preserves the soul, the other preserves the empire. Arthur looked at Selena, broken, wet, and desperate, and then at the city he now commanded. I am the king of a kingdom of ash, and the crown is starting to burn. The cold in this room isn't coming from the vents anymore. It's radiating from the floor, from the walls, from the very air I breathe. I look at Selena, and for the first time in 6 months, I don't see the woman who betrayed me. I see a mirror. I see what happens when you let the pursuit of more hollow out your chest until there's nothing left but a ledger. My hand is on the phone, the line to the district attorney open and waiting. One word and she's gone. One word and I'm finally free of the past. But my throat is tight, and the silence of this office feels like it's screaming. I've become the executioner, but I'm the one wearing the hood. Arthur picked up the receiver, his thumb hovering over the dial. Selena didn't move. She stood by the desk, her shoulders slumped, her spirit finally extinguished. The rain lashed against the reinforced glass behind them, a rhythmic drumming that sounded like a countdown. One call, Selena, Arthur said, his voice a gravelly whisper. One call and the fraud investigation shifts entirely to you and Julian. The pre-existing debt clause becomes a life sentence. You'll be paying back the Sterling estate until the day you die. He looked at her, searching for a spark of the old Selena, but there was only a vast, empty gray. But I'm going to give you a different choice, he continued. He pulled a single sheet of paper from a drawer, not a legal document, but a personal one. I will buy out Julian's debt. I will clear your name from the civil suit. I will give you enough to move back to your mother's town and start over. He paused, the weight of the silence stretching between them. I'm offering her a life, and I'm doing it to save what's left of mine. Selena looked up, her eyes wide with a flicker of disbelief. Why? She choked out. After everything I did, after how I laughed in your face, why would you help me now? Arthur didn't blink. Because if I destroy you completely, then Julian wins. He wanted me to become a monster just like him. He wanted me to use the sterling name to crush anything that got in my way. He pushed the paper toward her. Sign this. It's a non-disclosure and a total forfeiture of any future contact. You disappear and the debt disappears with you. Thorne stepped forward, his face a mask of sudden, sharp alarm. Arthur, you haven't read the final attachment from the probate office. You can't just absorb Vane's debt. He pulled a document from his folder, his fingers moving with frantic speed. Vane didn't just borrow against the Midtown project. He used the pre-existing debt clause to link his personal liabilities to the marriage itself. If you buy his debt to save her, you are legally assuming his fraud as part of the Sterling merger. The room went still. Arthur looked at the document Thorne held out. It was a masterpiece of legal malice. Julian hadn't just used Selena. He had planned for Arthur's potential mercy. By signing the divorce papers before Arthur claimed the inheritance, Selena had unknowingly acted as a legal conduit. If Arthur saved her now, he would be admitting that Julian's fraudulent activities were marital obligations. It was a poison pill buried in the heart of a billion-dollar empire. The snake bit me from beyond the grave. If you sign that release, Arthur, Thorne said, his voice dropping to a deathly low tone, the Sterling board will have grounds to remove you. They'll call it a breach of fiduciary duty. You'll lose the CEO chair. You'll lose the majority stake. He looked at Selena, then back to Arthur. You have to let her fall. It's the only way to keep the crown. Selena looked at the paper, then at Arthur. She realized now that her freedom would cost him everything he had just gained. Arthur looked at the gold pen on the desk. He thought about the small apartment, the history books, and the man who used to believe that people were more than their net worth. He looked at Selena, the woman who had broken his heart, but also the only person who truly knew the man he used to be. He picked up the pen. With a slow, deliberate motion, he signed the debt release. He didn't laugh. He didn't hesitate. He just wrote his name. I am signing away a kingdom to buy back my soul. Thorne let out a long, slow breath and walked out of the office without a word. The game was over. Within the hour, the board would be notified. The private security would arrive to escort Arthur out of the building. Arthur stood up and walked to the door. He didn't look at the monitors or the mahogany desk. He looked at Selena. Go, he said softly. Don't look back. Don't go to Julian. Just go. Selena stood there for a long moment, the tears finally falling freely, before she turned and vanished into the elevator. 10 minutes later, Arthur walked out of the front doors of the Sterling Tower. He didn't have a briefcase. He didn't have a limousine. He just had the clothes on his back and the cold rain hitting his face. He looked up at the glass spire, the S logo glowing in the dark. He was a poor man again, or as close to it as the legal fees would allow. He began to walk down the street, his footsteps splashing in the puddles. He felt light. He felt human. The man I was is dead, and the king I became is gone. I'm just a man walking in the rain, and for the first time in 6 months, I can breathe.